The night rain tapped softly against the kitchen window as Margaret stood by the counter, drying the last dish. The house felt too quiet now. It used to be filled with her daughter Emily's laughter, the sound of music from her bedroom, the chatter of plans for college, weddings, and life. But Emily had been married for a year now, living 2 hours away in Portland with her husband Ryan. Margaret often told herself she was proud. Emily had built a good life. Yet sometimes, the silence in the house felt like it had weight. That Friday evening, Margaret wasn't expecting anyone. She had planned a quiet night, some tea, a book, maybe a movie to keep her company. But the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. When she opened the door, Ryan stood there, his jacket damp from the rain. His expression carried something she couldn't read. Tired, unsure, almost lost. "Ryan?" she said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" He gave a faint smile. "Hi, Margaret. I'm sorry to show up like this. I was driving back from a business trip and my car broke down a few miles away. I remembered you lived nearby." She stepped aside immediately. "Of course. Come in. It's pouring out there." Ryan walked in, shaking the rain from his hair. He looked different from the last time she'd seen him at a family dinner, more serious, a little distant. Margaret noticed the way he hesitated near the kitchen table, as if unsure whether he should sit or stand. "I called a tow truck," he explained. "They'll come in about an hour. I hope it's okay if I wait here." "It's fine," she said softly. "You look exhausted. Let me make you some tea." While she boiled water, he walked around the kitchen, glancing at the framed photos on the wall. Emily as a child, Margaret holding her at the beach, the three of them smiling at the wedding. There was warmth in those pictures, but tonight the air between them carried something heavier. "You've lost weight," he said suddenly, his tone casual but sincere. She laughed lightly. "Maybe because cooking for one doesn't inspire much appetite." He nodded, his expression softening. "Emily mentioned you've been spending more time alone lately." Margaret looked at him carefully. "She worries too much. I'm fine, really. Just quieter days." For a moment, they stood in silence. The sound of the rain filled the space between their words. When she handed him the cup of tea, their fingers brushed slightly. It was a small thing, nothing meant by it, but it startled her. Not because it was wrong, but because she realized how long it had been since anyone had looked at her with simple human attention. They sat at the table, the warmth of the tea steaming up between them. "You know," Ryan said after a while, "Emily and I have been arguing a bit. Small things, mostly about time. She's busy with her new job, and I've been traveling a lot. Sometimes it feels like we're missing each other." Margaret listened carefully. She didn't want to intrude, but she understood the tone in his voice. It was the sound of someone trying to hold things together. "Marriage isn't easy," she said gently. "Even when you love someone, life keeps testing your patience." He nodded slowly, his eyes on his tea. "You must know that better than anyone." Her lips curved faintly. "I do. And I also know that love doesn't disappear easily. It just hides behind tired days and unspoken words." The clock ticked quietly. For a brief moment, Ryan looked up at her. Not the polite look of a son-in-law, but something deeper. A look of understanding. He wasn't seeing her as Emily's mother right then, but as someone who understood loneliness, effort, and quiet endurance. It wasn't inappropriate. It was human. "I'm glad I stopped here," he said softly. "It's peaceful. You always made this place feel warm." She felt a faint ache in her chest. "That's kind of you to say. This house misses voices. It's nice having someone here again, even for a while." Before she could say more, her phone buzzed. Emily's name flashed on the screen. Margaret hesitated, then answered. "Mom? Ryan said his car broke down near your place. Is he there?" "Yes, dear. He's fine. I made him some tea while he waits for the tow truck. Emily sighed with relief. Thank goodness. Tell him I'll call him later. Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart. When she hung up, Ryan gave a small smile. She always worries. She gets that from me, Margaret replied, smiling back. The tow truck arrived soon after, headlights cutting through the rain outside. Ryan thanked her for everything, promising to visit again soon, with Emily next time. But before he stepped out, he turned back at the doorway. You know, Margaret, he said quietly, you have this calm about you. It's rare. I didn't realize how much I missed that until tonight. She didn't know what to say. There was nothing romantic in his words, yet something inside her shifted, a reminder of how unseen she'd felt for years. She nodded, her voice steady. Drive safe, Ryan. Tell Emily I said hello. He smiled once more before walking into the rain. She stood at the door, watching his figure disappear under the gray streetlight, feeling a strange mix of warmth and melancholy. When the house fell silent again, Margaret returned to the kitchen and poured herself another cup of tea. The rain continued outside, soft but steady. She thought of Ryan's tired eyes, of the way he had looked at her, not with desire, but with recognition. It made her think about the years she had spent putting others first, about how love could fade quietly when no one noticed. That night, she sat by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. Something had changed, though she couldn't quite name it. It wasn't about Ryan. It was about herself. The brief encounter had stirred something she had forgotten existed. The simple need to feel seen, understood, and alive. And though she didn't know it yet, that night would ripple through the days ahead, connecting their lives in quiet, unexpected ways. Days passed, and Margaret tried to forget that evening. It wasn't that anything inappropriate had happened, far from it, but the way Ryan had looked at her lingered in her thoughts more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was only kindness, maybe gratitude. Still, she couldn't shake off the quiet warmth she had felt after he left, like a forgotten spark reignited somewhere deep inside. A week later, Emily called. Mom, she said cheerfully. Ryan and I are coming to visit this weekend. We both miss you. Margaret smiled at the news. That's wonderful. I'll cook your favorites. The weekend arrived with clear skies and spring air. Margaret had spent the morning preparing. Fresh flowers on the table, roast chicken in the oven, soft music playing in the background. When Emily and Ryan pulled up the driveway, Margaret's heart lifted. She hadn't realized how much she needed their presence until now. Emily rushed in first, arms open wide. Mom, you look amazing. Margaret laughed. That's what happens when you finally get visitors. Ryan followed behind, carrying a bottle of wine. It's good to see you, Margaret, he said warmly. For a while, everything felt easy and natural. They talked about Emily's work, her plans for grad school, Ryan's projects, and neighborhood gossip. The air was filled with laughter. Margaret noticed the way Ryan listened when she spoke, not just politely, but with genuine interest, something she rarely found even among friends. But she brushed that thought away quickly. After lunch, Emily got a call from her office. She stepped outside to handle it, leaving Ryan and Margaret alone at the table. The sunlight fell through the kitchen window, casting soft shadows on the floor. Ryan looked around and smiled faintly. You really keep this place beautiful. It feels peaceful. It's quiet, she replied, folding the napkins. Sometimes too quiet. He nodded slowly. You ever think of moving? Maybe closer to Emily? Margaret shook her head. No, this is home. Every corner has a memory. He watched her for a moment, his expression gentle but curious. You've lived alone since your husband passed, right? Yes, she said softly. It's been years, but you never fully stopped missing someone. You just learned to carry the silence, Ryan leaned back slightly, thoughtful. I get that. Even when you're with someone, it's possible to feel alone too. That made her pause. His voice had changed, quieter, heavier. She could sense the fatigue beneath his calm tone, the kind that comes from trying to make something work that keeps slipping away. Before she could respond, Emily returned, apologizing for the interruption. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly, though Margaret noticed small things. Ryan seemed distracted, often glancing toward the window or at his watch. Emily, cheerful as always, didn't seem to notice. As evening came, Emily decided to stay the night. "It'll be fun, like old times," she said, hugging her mother. "We'll leave early tomorrow." They spent hours talking and laughing. By the time they went to bed, the house had settled into that quiet stillness again. But sometime past midnight, Margaret couldn't sleep. She walked downstairs to make tea, her robe wrapped tightly around her. The living room light was already on. Ryan sat there, half asleep on the couch, a book in his hand. He startled slightly when she entered. "Oh, sorry," he said, standing up. "I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to wake anyone." "You didn't," she said, smiling gently. "I couldn't either. Tea?" He nodded, following her into the kitchen. The two sat quietly, the clock ticking softly beside them. Rain had started again, tapping lightly against the window. The same sound as the night he first came. Margaret spoke first. "Emily told me you've been traveling a lot. That must be hard." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if the distance isn't just physical anymore." She looked at him with understanding. "Marriage has seasons. Some are hard, but it doesn't mean it's over." Ryan met her eyes, his voice calm but heavy. "You sound like someone who's lived that truth." "I have," she admitted. "But I also learned that love needs attention. Not just words or gifts, but time. Real time." For a while, neither spoke. The moment wasn't uncomfortable, it was honest. They were two people from different worlds, connected only by their care for Emily, yet somehow understanding each other's quiet loneliness. Ryan broke the silence. "You know, Margaret, that night when I came here, I was falling apart a bit. You probably didn't notice, but I was lost. Talking to you helped me breathe again." She smiled faintly. "Everyone needs a pause sometimes." He studied her face, almost as if he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he finished his tea and stood up. "Thank you, for tonight and for that night too. You have this way of making things feel lighter. Maybe it's just age," she joked softly. "You learn to stop fighting storms and start listening to the rain." Ryan smiled, that same tired but sincere smile. "Maybe that's what I need to learn too." When he left the kitchen, Margaret stood there for a long moment. Something about the evening had stirred emotions she couldn't name. Nothing improper, nothing romantic in the wrong way, but deeply human. There was compassion, admiration, and a shared ache for connection that life had slowly buried under responsibility. The next morning, breakfast was cheerful again. Emily teased Ryan for being quiet, and he only smiled, squeezing her hand. Margaret felt relief at the sight. Whatever weight had existed the night before seemed lighter. As they were leaving, Ryan turned back at the door, his voice low enough that only Margaret could hear. "Thank you for last night." "For listening," she nodded, her heart steady. "Take care of each other, Ryan. That's all that matters." He held her gaze for a moment, his eyes sincere. "I will." When the door closed, Margaret stood still, listening to the fading sound of their car. She felt both peace and a strange emptiness. It wasn't love she felt toward him, at least not the kind that broke rules. It was a reminder that people are fragile. That connection sometimes appears in unexpected places, and that life still had ways of surprising her. That evening, as she watered her plants by the window, the rain started again, soft and rhythmic. It reminded her of both nights, when Ryan arrived drenched and broken, and when he sat across from her with honest eyes. She didn't know what would come next, but something inside her had changed again. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer saw herself as someone merely watching others live. For the first time in years, she felt quietly alive. The next few weeks went by quietly for Margaret. Life returned to its usual rhythm: morning coffee, tending her small garden, reading in the evenings, but something in her had shifted. That conversation with Ryan had stayed in her thoughts, not because it was wrong, but because it reminded her how long it had been since someone truly listened to her. It wasn't about attraction. It was about being seen again, being heard. One afternoon, she received a message from Emily. "Mom, I'm traveling next week for a conference. Ryan has to stay behind for work. Can you check in on him while I'm gone? He's been overworking again." Margaret hesitated for a second. It wasn't that she minded, it just felt complicated. But Emily's tone was casual, trusting. So she agreed. "Of course. I'll drop by," she texted back. The week arrived with chilly winds and long gray skies. When Margaret visited Ryan's house, she found him in the middle of his messy office, surrounded by papers and coffee mugs. "You weren't kidding," she said with a half smile. "You do need someone to check on you." He looked up, surprised but relieved. "Margaret, you didn't have to come. I'm fine." "Fine doesn't usually look this exhausted," she said gently. "Have you even eaten?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been on calls all day. I lost track." Margaret went into the kitchen, ignoring his protests. She made him a sandwich and poured tea. The simple act made the room feel warmer. Ryan sat at the table, shaking his head slightly. "You remind me of my mom," he said. "She used to do this, force me to stop and eat when I worked too much." Margaret smiled softly. "Sounds like she cared deeply." "She did," he said, his eyes lowering. "She passed away a few years ago. I never told Emily that I still dream about her sometimes. She was the one person who always understood me." Margaret felt a tug at her heart. "Grief never really leaves," she said. "But sometimes the way we remember people helps us heal." He nodded, taking a sip of tea. "You know, I didn't expect to feel this comfortable talking to you. You have this calm energy." She laughed quietly. "It's just age and too many cups of tea." But he shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You listen in a way that makes people feel safe." His words caught her off guard. For years, she'd been the quiet one in every room, someone people confided in but rarely saw. And here was Ryan, seeing her clearly. Still, she didn't dwell on it. She changed the subject, asking about his work, his goals, his dreams. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. When she finally stood to leave, rain had started outside again, gentle and steady. Ryan walked her to the door. "Thanks for coming by," he said sincerely. "I didn't realize how much I needed a normal conversation." "You're welcome," she replied. "Take care of yourself, and eat something that's not instant noodles next time." He smiled, a bit of life returning to his face. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret went home that night with mixed emotions. She wasn't confused, but she was thoughtful. She saw Ryan as someone lost in a fast-paced world, overworked, quietly unhappy, trying to do right by everyone but himself. And she wondered if Emily ever saw that side of him. The next few days, Ryan started calling her once in a while. Nothing inappropriate, just simple things. "Do you know how to fix a leaky faucet?" Or, "What's your recipe for that soup you made?" It became an unspoken routine. Margaret answered kindly, always maintaining the boundaries she knew mattered. Still, she couldn't deny that those small exchanges brightened her days. Then one Friday evening, Emily called from her hotel, exhausted but cheerful. "Mom, you're a lifesaver for checking in on Ryan. He told me you've been helping him." Margaret smiled faintly. "Just making sure he eats. Well, thank you. You're the best." After they hung up, Margaret sat in her quiet living room. She thought about Emily's words. The best. It felt bittersweet. She wasn't sure when her role had shifted from being needed as a mother to being simply someone who helps. 2 days later, Ryan stopped by her house unexpectedly, holding a small box. "I was driving by and thought of you," he said, smiling nervously. "These are from that bakery you like." She blinked, surprised. Ryan, you didn't have to. I wanted to, he said. You've done a lot for me lately. They shared coffee and pastries in her kitchen. The air between them was easy again, friendly, honest, filled with quiet gratitude. But as they talked, Ryan's tone grew thoughtful. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? She nodded cautiously. How did you know when your marriage was in trouble? The question hit harder than she expected. She took a deep breath. When the silence stopped feeling peaceful, she said finally. When it became a wall instead of a space to rest. Ryan nodded slowly. That's exactly how I feel lately. Emily and I, we care about each other, but something's missing, and I don't know how to fix it. Margaret felt an ache in her chest. She wanted to tell him that all marriages had seasons, that love required work, patience, and forgiveness. But she also knew she couldn't speak for her daughter's heart. You have to talk to her, Ryan, she said gently. Don't let distance become normal. It never ends well. He looked at her, eyes full of conflict. You always know the right thing to say. Because I learned it the hard way, she replied softly. That moment lingered. Then Ryan smiled faintly, setting his cup down. I should go before the rain gets worse. Drive safe, she said. He nodded, pausing at the doorway. You really have changed my way of seeing things, Margaret. You make people remember what matters. As the door closed, Margaret felt her eyes sting with emotion, not because of him, but because of the truth in his words. For so long, she had seen herself as someone whose story had ended. But Ryan, in his lost, searching way, had reminded her that life didn't stop after heartbreak or loss. It simply waited for courage. That night, she looked out at the rain, realizing something important. Sometimes, people come into your life not to start something new, but to help you rediscover what you thought you had lost. Your voice, your purpose, your strength. And though she knew boundaries mattered more than ever, she also understood that compassion wasn't a sin. It was what made her human. The following week, autumn arrived in full swing. Leaves scattered across the streets, and the air turned sharp and crisp. Margaret loved this time of year. It made her feel alive, nostalgic, and a little sad all at once. But lately, her peace had been mixed with confusion. Ryan's words lingered in her thoughts. His kindness, his honesty. And that way he sometimes looked at her, like he saw beyond her calm surface. She knew he didn't mean anything by it, yet something in her heart shifted every time their paths crossed. One evening, Emily returned from her business trip. Margaret was relieved to see her daughter looking rested and happy. They decided to have dinner together at Margaret's house. When Ryan arrived with Emily, the air felt slightly heavier, filled with unspoken things. Margaret welcomed them with warmth, but deep down, she noticed the quiet distance between the couple. Emily scrolled through her phone often, answering work messages even during dinner. Ryan sat politely, trying to hide his tiredness. As the evening went on, Margaret tried to lighten the mood with stories from Emily's childhood. It worked for a while. They laughed, they talked, but she could still sense something unsettled between them. After dinner, Emily went outside to take a call, leaving Ryan in the kitchen helping Margaret clean up. The silence between them was calm but charged. Ryan broke it softly. You were right, he said. We've both been so busy trying to keep life moving that we forgot how to talk to each other. Margaret handed him a plate to dry. It happens to everyone, she said. But it's never too late to find your way back. He looked at her for a moment. You always make things sound simple. They're not simple, she replied. But they become easier when you stop running from them. There was a quiet pause. The light from the kitchen window fell on Ryan's face, showing a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Then he said something unexpected. You know, Margaret, when I first met you, I thought you were the calmest person I'd ever seen. But now I realize you're not calm because life was easy. You're calm because you learned how to live through pain. The words hit deep. Margaret didn't respond right away. Her heart tightened, not from attraction, but from understanding. Ryan wasn't looking at her as his wife's mother at that moment. He was looking at her as someone who had survived, who carried grace despite the weight of years. Before she could reply, Emily walked back in. "You two look serious," she said with a half-smile. Margaret quickly composed herself. "We were just talking about life." Ryan smiled faintly. "Your mom's better at it than most of us." They left soon after, and Margaret stood at the doorway watching them drive away. That night she sat by her window long after midnight, listening to the wind. She felt a strange ache, a mix of pride and melancholy. She had always wanted her daughter to have a good life, to be loved, to be understood. Now, she wondered if Emily realized how much Ryan was quietly struggling to keep that love steady. A few days passed before Margaret heard from Ryan again. This time it was Emily who called. Her voice sounded strained. "Mom, we had a fight. Ryan's been distant lately. I don't know what's wrong." Margaret's heart tightened. "Did you talk to him?" "I tried," Emily said, her voice breaking a little. "He said he's tired of pretending everything's perfect. I don't know what that means." Margaret wanted to help, but she knew this was something they had to face themselves. Still, she decided to visit Ryan the next day. Not as a mother-in-law, but as someone who cared about both of them. When she arrived, Ryan looked weary but calm. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Emily told you?" he asked. "She did," Margaret said gently. "And I'm not here to take sides. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." He nodded, sitting down. "I am, or at least I'm trying to be. I think we both forgot who we were before everything got busy. I love Emily, but we've been living like strangers lately." Margaret sat beside him, her voice steady. "Then find your way back to her. Don't give up just because it feels hard. Love isn't always passion. It's effort, understanding, forgiveness." Ryan looked at her, eyes soft with respect. "You talk like someone who's loved deeply." "I have," she said quietly. "And I've lost too. But that's what taught me how precious it is." He smiled faintly. "You know, you've taught me more about marriage than anyone ever has." She smiled back, though her heart ached a little. "Then use it well, Ryan. Don't let it end in regret." They talked for a while longer, about life, choices, and the courage it took to stay when walking away seemed easier. Before she left, Ryan said something that stayed with her. "You were never just Emily's mother to me, Margaret. You're someone who reminded me what love should feel like. Quiet, steady, and real." She didn't respond to that. She just smiled and walked out into the fading sunlight, letting the cool air calm her heart. Weeks passed. Emily and Ryan started therapy, began rebuilding what had faded. Margaret saw them smiling again, holding hands, laughing softly during family dinners. It gave her peace. She knew whatever had passed between her and Ryan wasn't love. It was recognition. The meeting of two lonely souls who helped each other remember who they were. Months later, during a Thanksgiving gathering, Emily hugged her mother tightly. "Mom, I don't know what you said to Ryan, but thank you. We're better now. He's more present, more him." Margaret smiled, eyes warm. "That's all that matters, sweetheart." That evening, as everyone gathered around the table, Ryan caught her gaze briefly from across the room. His expression wasn't longing, it was gratitude, the kind that needed no words. Margaret returned the look with a gentle nod, and in that silent exchange, everything was understood. When the guests left and the night grew quiet, Margaret stepped out onto her porch. The air was cold, the stars faint, but her heart felt light. She realized that life often brings people together for reasons beyond love or destiny. Sometimes it's simply to heal what's broken inside us. Ryan had taught her that she still had the power to inspire hope. And she had helped him remember that love was not about perfection. It was about staying, forgiving, and choosing each other every day. She smiled softly to herself, whispering into the wind. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need peace. And with that, Margaret walked back inside, closing the door behind her, carrying the quiet strength of a woman who had lived, learned, and loved without regret.